And here we go, everyone. And good morning, everyone. Welcome into Morning Invest on this Tuesday. It is the 28th of July, is it? Can you believe it? Already 28th of July. And we finally have ourselves a stimulus plan from Republicans. It only took us like 100 days to get here. Thanks, Republicans, for being so timely. We're going to dive deep this morning into what their plan looks like, how likely it is to pass, when it will pass, how much money you will likely get under the Republican plan. Will Democrats come to the table on certain pieces of this and get some of this passed? We're going to go deep on this today, okay? So buckle your seatbelts on that front. We're also going to be giving you some coronavirus updates today and doing a deep dive on where the country stands right now with reopening. And also this week, all eyes on Jerome Powell, the head of the Federal Reserve. He's going to be holding his annual meeting or big meeting on Wednesday. And we're going to now see, will he try to sway Congress one way or the other politically? They try to stay hands off with this, but there's mounting pressure for the Fed chief to sort of step in, weigh in, and give a consensus message as to how they see this stimulus package. Is it good? Is it bad? Do we need more or do we need less? If we've heard him before, chances are we know we need more in this new plan. All of that and more on the show today. And Grover, if Grover's being a diva today, running around just annoying other dogs, so he'll pop up eventually. I do want to say, please subscribe to our morning newsletter. If you are new here, we have a morning newsletter. It's totally free. It'll be delivered to your inbox first thing in the morning. You can read it over coffee in about 5 minutes. Some of the big stories in the economy that we're covering for you, and a little bit of humor. We keep trying to get Grover to write his own column in the newsletter, and he says he'll do it. He just needs some time to think about what he's going to write. So again, he is being a little bit of a diva this morning. So if you're new here, thank you so much for joining us. My name is Clayton. We do this show Monday through Friday at 9 a.m. Eastern time. So go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe to the channel and set that little bell notification too, so you'll be notified when we start a new live show and publish a video. All right, let's dive into some of your big headlines this morning. I do want to start this morning with the coronavirus and where we're seeing some stagnation in certain states and where we're seeing some expansion in others. Now, these are the latest death numbers in dark brown. We're seeing spikes in certain areas, of course, across the South. And in Florida is one of the epicenters right now. California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Georgia, North Carolina. So any of those areas where you're seeing these, the brown is not really good. We don't want to be seeing brown right now. And we are seeing some overall problems right now in the coronavirus response from different sources, including some different hospital updates that say they are still being slammed. 16 states set new highs last week for coronavirus infections, and a single day record across 16 different states. According to all of these different state health departments, 8 states surpassed records set the previous week. Senate Leader Mitch McConnell and other Republicans, of course, rolled out this stimulus, which we'll get to in a minute. And there's some amount of testing in that stimulus, which we'll get to. Think about what's going to happen in the next few weeks, folks, and this is why this update is pretty amazing right now. The first presidential debate is set for September 29th. We only have 98 days until Election Day. 98 days until Election Day. It was set to be on earlier. This first presidential debate on September 29th is going to be moved from the University of Notre Dame to Indiana to Cleveland at a site that will be co-hosted by Case Western Reserve University due to coronavirus concerns. The Democratic National Committee, during their conference, they announced Monday that attendees for its August convention in Milwaukee must agree to daily testing and protective self-isolation measures. The Miami Marlins, half of that baseball team has coronavirus, and they're now having to self-isolate for the next 14 days. The fact that they all got coronavirus, they decided to play the game anyway during a group chat. They decided, we'll just get together and play. Now that could have implications for the Yankees, for the Phillies, who they did play at Citizens Bank Park, the Yankees-Phillies game that had to be canceled. And so now this could put the entire Major League Baseball season, it could end the entire Major League Baseball season, thanks to maybe some carelessness of the Miami Marlins. We'll see more on that report. But, no one's immune right now. It's crazy to think that we just started playing this weekend. I mean, I honestly think they should just cancel the rest of the season at this point. What's the point? what's the point of having half of a season and all of these concerns about these players and the travel? And it's not even just the players, fine with them, right? But it's also the team support, the trainers and other people who, don't make millions of dollars a year, don't maybe have access to the same sorts of health care that the players do. There's a lot of other things at play here that aren't just about the players. Adults under 65 right now make up a higher share of coronavirus deaths in the South than in the Northeast. We're also seeing a spike in young people, have greatly increased in Florida. This is really troubling news out of Florida because we've been hearing, though, it's fine among young people. If they get it, they're fine. That's not the case. We're seeing an increase in deaths among young people. Total infections up 34%. Hospitalizations up 23% between July 16th and July 24th among young people. President Trump is also going to try to push this vaccine as much as he can on therapeutic news at his coronavirus briefing. So if you're watching the president during these meetings, the president is going to be pushing for that. And guess what? We actually have a bit of news on this virus front, or the vaccine front. Yes, in fact, we now have vaccine trials have begun. At 6 a.m. on Monday morning, the very first patient received a volunteer received a shot in the arm with the coronavirus vaccine in a human experiment. It's going to be a massive human experiment. It's going to have 30,000 participants. How many of you out there want to participate in this vaccine trial right now? 30,000 people are to be injected with the coronavirus vaccine. And it's all being developed, of course, by Moderna, which is in collaboration with the National Institutes of Health. So this is some good news. This is the big push. The pharmaceuticals giant Pfizer also announced it was going to be taking part in this 30,000 person vaccine trial at 120 sites around the world right now. This is going to be a big deal. And this is moving at warp speed. We've never had a vaccine trial move this quickly, and all pressure mounting right now to get this thing through. So we will see. Let's talk about Google this morning, because Google is now saying, look, we're not going to have anyone return to work for the next until the, sorry. Come on, Grover. You want to yell like crazy? And yell at another dog? I'm trying to do a show. If you guys can handle it, I can handle it. I just don't want to. I'm going to be talking over barking for the next 5 minutes. He just has to show somebody who's boss. Yeah, you want to let them know who's boss, buddy? Yeah, someone says, I just hope you have some good news today. Grover, you want to come back and lay down in your bed? He is being a diva today, isn't he? So let's talk about Google. Because Google announced that no one will have to return to the office through 2021. 200,000 people in their workforce, full-time and contract workers, done. You don't have to come back. Besides saving a small fortune, I saw this written on Kind bars. If you've ever been into a Google office, I have a couple of times, and there's like scooters that you can ride around in the office. There's food everywhere. There's sodas and seltzer waters and all kinds of stuff. They have Kind bars and fruit and everything sort of stationed all over the place that you can get access to. Grover loves the idea. Free food all the time, anywhere you want. So they don't have to spend money on this anymore, which is good news. Besides saving a small fortune on that stuff, CEO Sundar Pichai wanted to provide flexibility for working parents who may need to provide childcare this fall. So that's one of the big reasons. Relocating employees who want to sign full-year leases in their Mountain Beach town of choice can just say, you know what? I don't want to go back to the office. I don't need to be up in Mountain View. I don't need to be at these offices in Manhattan and Chelsea. I don't want to be paying some ridiculous rent right now in Manhattan. I can go up into the mountains of Pennsylvania, live like a king for a fraction of the cost. Now, this is a big deal for all of these businesses that rely on Google, that are surrounded by Google in these different areas. There's a lot of support people who provide a lot of different food services and things like that to Google in those offices. Now imagine having 8,000 people that would once come into these offices every day, and now they're not. Now only 500 people are there. That's it. So all of those restaurants and convenience stores and everything else that rely on that infrastructure, gone. But this is, you're starting to see a major shift among these big companies. We've already seen it from Twitter. We're already seeing it from Facebook. Apple has sent employees home for a large portion of the year. This is going to change the dynamic of commercial real estate in these areas and in these big cities. You're already seeing an exodus from these big cities out into the suburbs. So interesting times right now for these big companies. Another big story that I'm following is this this Washington Examiner story. I'm surprised by this. And I want you to take this with a grain of salt this morning. When you see a story like this, now Washington Examiner is a conservative newspaper, okay? Conservative newspaper. They published a story today that Republicans are considering throwing in the towel on Trump winning this election. And they're basically saying we're turning our attention to 2024. One of the Republican strategists says the thought is starting to cross people's minds. One way or the other, there will be life after Trump, they say. Now, when you see a story, I guarantee you're going to start to see a few more of these stories start to emerge from the establishment conservative media. Establishment conservatives have never been on board with Trump. You've had multiple conservative newspapers. You've seen the Bill Kristols of the world. They've never been a fan of Trump. And I think you're starting to see even more of that. So over the next few weeks, you're going to start to see the establishment Washington conservative newspaper group and journalists, you can call them journalists, start to float more and more of these stories, that there's this revolt inside the Republican Party right now over Trump. And that might be true. There might be strategists and others. There might be members of Congress who, are looking to the day when Trump's no longer their president and they can go back to typical Republican Party politics. But I'm here to tell you, don't believe the hype in all of this. Why am I saying that? Well, because 73% of people in a Fox News poll just said that they were happy, his supporters were happy with their choice as a nominee, while 62% compared to presumptive Democratic nominee on the Joe Biden front. Also, the Republicans just raised $20 million in a virtual fundraiser over Zoom. $20 million. So when I see headlines like this, I want to sort of help you cut through this noise. So if you see friends sharing this kind of stuff on Facebook or whatever, I just want you to understand what's going on here. It's the establishment conservatives that would never liked him are saying we're setting our eyes on 2024. And that may be the case. And they probably already were when he won in 2016. But the chances of writing him off at this point it would be a huge mistake. But we should actually look at what's happening right now. We only have 98 days until Election Day. 98 days until Election Day. And Republicans only have a short window right now until early voting starts. And what we're going to get to in the stimulus bill, I think, is a total disaster for Republicans. So we'll dive deeper into that. But they have 45 days essentially to turn this thing around, to start seeing an upswing in the polls in some of these really conservative parts of the country that are now having Biden winning. And you're seeing the support in Trump's base dropping. 45 days before early voting starts. That is not a lot of time to turn things around. And they are in for a bloodbath unless they can do so in a short amount of time. Another story I'm following for you this morning is this. Mysterious seeds are showing up in people's mailboxes in Kentucky. I know this is such a bizarre mystery. Are you one of these people? There are people all across Kentucky that are receiving weird, mysterious packages in the mail, and apparently they're coming from China. Frankfort, Kentucky, agriculture officials there in multiple states have issued warnings about unsolicited shipments of foreign seeds that are showing up in people's mailboxes. They're being warned, do not plant these seeds, do not do it. In Kentucky, the agriculture department said they were notified that several residents received unsolicited seed packages by mail that appeared to have come from China. How many of you watching right now received something like this? I would love to know what they look like. The types of seeds are unknown and could be harmful, according to the U.S. agriculture divisions in these different states. We don't know what they are. We cannot risk harm whatsoever to agricultural production in the United States. We have the safest, most abundant food supply in the world, and we need to keep it that way. They said anyone who receives these seeds should contact the state agriculture department immediately to turn them in. 8 states have now had people receiving these seed packages from China. Who knows what the heck they are? This is remarkable. And what's more remarkable is how hurt our food supply is right now, thanks to coronavirus. So what sort of a tactic is unfolding right now? Is this a Chinese-run, operation where Americans are receiving should-be quarantined seeds in the mail? This is reporting from CBS News. The agency was aware that people across the country have received unsolicited packages of seeds from China, according to Reuters. In North Carolina, the Department of Agriculture there said it was contacted by numerous people who received these seed shipments that they did not order. The agency said the shipments were likely the product of an international internet scam known as brushing. So what that does is that, according to Better Business Bureau, third-party sellers use your address and Amazon information to generate fake sales and fake reviews to boost their product ratings. At this level, 8 states? That's some heck of a campaign from China. So again, if you receive any of these things, I would immediately contact your local USDA, contact your local authorities there to have them investigate this. It's a bizarre story, and I wanted to bring it to you today. So those are a quick look at your headlines this morning. Let's dive now into the stimulus. That's right. So we've got some big news on the stimulus front. Republicans have finally unfolded their stimulus package, the $1 trillion package. Now, if you watched yesterday, you know that I brought you some of the news already on this, which was the unemployment part of this. But I want to go through in detail now what Republicans are looking to do with this stimulus package. Number one, you will receive additional $1,200 stimulus check payment. Now, what's a little bit different, I want to go through what's different from this one compared to the first bill. So the next stimulus check will be the same as the CARES Act from March. That means if you qualify, if you're a single filer at $75,000, Mitch McConnell did not get his $40,000 adjusted gross income, $75,000, you would qualify for a $1,200 payment. Joint filers, $150,000 would receive stimulus checks. Heads of household would receive it if you are $112,000, $500. Head of household would also be able to get this stimulus check. You'll get an additional $500 per dependent. What is different about this payment, and many of you I know that are watching right now have this exact situation in your family where you may have an adult dependent living at home with you. So that adult dependent may have some reason that they are living at home and you're taking care of that person who's 32 years old, 30 years old. They would now, under this one, receive a stimulus dependency payment, which is good news, $500. Not as high as what Democrats want. So let's keep going. For example, so if you're a single filer with an adjusted gross income of $80,000, you would see a reduction of your check by about $250 or 5% of the larger $5,000 payment. So anything over $75,000, you're going to start to see it whittled down based on the amount that you make above that. The second stimulus check will also use the 2019 tax income year. Now, this has been frustrating for me, and I still don't understand why this is the case, because so many of you lost your jobs this year. But yes, Republicans will say, yes, remember, it is a tax credit in the 2020 calendar year, so you'll be able to get it on your taxes next year if you lost your job in the 2020 calendar year. It's a tax credit, so that's good news. You'll get it in 2021? No, we need it now. We need it right now. We don't need it next year. So again, it is going to look at your 2019 tax return for calculating your check amount. If they do not have that information, you can still use your 2018 tax return. Again, going back 2 years when you had a job. So that's how this is all going to be rolled out. This is the same as with the CARES Act, except the CARES Act also extended the due date of your 2019 tax return up through July 15th. So that's important. This meant that with the IRS was sending out checks, a lot of Americans hadn't yet filed their tax returns, so they didn't even know what was in their tax return in order to base it on that. Ridiculous. Your second stimulus check may be for a different amount depending on how much your income changed from year to year, so you need to pay attention to that. Let's talk about the tax structure of this check. Both checks are advances on a refundable tax credit for the 2020 tax year. This means the bill would create a new refundable tax credit based on your income and will pay you now as an advance. So you're basically just getting an advance payment. The credit is based on your 2019 tax return. So if you filed one otherwise, again, you can use your 2018 tax return. It's protected against federal or state debts. So you can't be, if you've got some sort of a federal or state debt, it is protected against that, with the exception, of course, if you owe past due child support payments. Past due child support payments are not covered under this, and that, it'll be taken right out of these payments if you owe back child support. There's an expanded definition now of a dependent, which I mentioned before. That means that $500 would be for anyone at 17 was the cap. Now it doesn't matter. There is no age cap on dependency any longer. The thing is, the people who were in college, that was the big issue, is that people who were in college who were receiving stimulus payments before, they weren't getting stimulus payments, and they should have been getting stimulus payments, right, Grover? They should have been. And they were living with their parents. So they not only had to go home from college, they couldn't work because they couldn't get a job, and they also couldn't get a stimulus payment. So now under this, they would be eligible for that $500 payment. If you're deceased or you are incarcerated, they would be explicitly excluded. The second checks will not be given to those who died. That's good news. We made some progress. We're not giving checks out to dead people. Give a golf clap for that. Thank you. Because last time we gave out billions of dollars to dead people. And of course the IRS initially said, hey, if you got one that was for a dead person in your family, go ahead and keep it. Then they came out and said, no, we want it back. What if that person already spent it? What if the widow of someone who passed away already spent that money because they needed it? And now the IRS said they wanted it back? This time though, they're not going to get checks. Dead people will not get checks. Also, those who are incarcerated will not get checks. So if you are in jail for the entirety of 2020, January 1st, 2020, or all the way up, you will not receive a stimulus check. So there you go. And it is protected against creditors and debt collectors. The act would also additional protections against bank garnishment or any debt collections. In fact, the new law would amend the CARES Act to offer those protections to the first check as well. So it's going to be retroactive if you've had money taken out of that from some sort of a debt collector from the first check. So here's how it's different than what the Democrats want in their HEROES Act. And remember, this is Chuck Grassley's bill. It's only a proposal at this point. So we don't even have it signed yet by Republicans. And then, of course, we have to see what Democrats will even do with this thing. I mean, talk about dragging your feet. I mean, that's what I want to get to here in a minute. It's just how they have, absolute political malpractice on this, and they have just dragged their feet. And how long until we could even see this thing get pushed through? Well, here's Kevin McCarthy on the House side. He's a Republican. He thinks, well, we could probably get it done sometime in August.
I believe we can get there. So you're going to hear some people making different points back and forth. That's part of making legislation. The deadline, I think, would probably get passed July 31st, but I bet we probably get this done the first week of August.
Oh, good. I bet we'll get it done by the first week of August. Sure. You've been so quick to get everything else done. I'm sure we'll get it through. So here's what's different than the HEROES Act. Now, this one's being called, of course, the HEALS Act. This is what Republicans have called it, because everything these days needs some sort of an acronym or branding, right? The HEALS Act. So what's different in this is really, that the only dependent payment is switched. The dependent payment is switched from, if you're above 17 years old, beyond, you will now be you'll be able to access this dependency payment if you're living at home. And deceased and incarcerated individuals won't receive stimulus checks, which, by the way, should have been handled earlier. And of course, the debt collection piece. That's it. There's no difference from the first one. Let's dive into some of the more details now. What's in this beyond just the direct stimulus payments? But we would have a slashing of the unemployment benefits from $600 per week down to $200 per week. And that's, of course, not going to fly with Democrats right now. When asked about this 70% wage replacement, dropping this down below the $600 limit that they had set up before. Nancy Pelosi was asked about this question. She said, I don't understand why we can prop up Wall Street. We can do so well for the stock market on the Federal Reserve side, but when it comes to the American people, they get shafted once again.
They have proposed $200 a week. You are holding at $600 a week. Do you see a compromise, or are you going to hold the line?
Well, let's just put it this way. I mean, I just leave it up to the American people. There are trillions of dollars being used now by the Fed and our government to bolster the stock market. Stock market's in good shape, right? And that may be a good idea. Why can't we spend trillions of dollars to bolster the middle class? So when they talk about what they're talking about, we're like, why are you quibbling over $600 when people need that to buy food, pay the rent, and again, inject demand into the economy by spending that money, inject demand, create jobs.
So it's a good point. I mean, we're able to prop up all these businesses. We're able to keep the economy floating with liquidity right now so that they can, get mortgages out for the average American right now who wants to buy a house or sell a house and go through that process, refinance. Wall Street, the big businesses are doing just fine. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell has done an excellent job on this. So when will Superman Jerome Powell step in and show up to be the adult in the room? Well, we're going to hear from him tomorrow, actually, and he's going to be pressed on whether or not this stimulus plan goes far enough. Now, they don't like to inject themselves in politics, right? He answers to Congress. The Federal Reserve answers to Congress. But he has not pulled punches lately. He has talked about the need for this to be regular stimulus, not just $1,200, maybe $2,000 per month on a regular basis through the end of the year like other countries have done. Will he do it tomorrow during this meeting? When asked about it, will he say, this does not go far enough, this is small, we need to go bigger? We'll see. The other question I want to ask for you is, this is President Trump. President Trump came out and said this will be bigger and better than anything the Democrats had wanted. And it's a third of what Democrats have wanted. He said, mark my words, it's going to be bigger and better than what they want. Well, it's not. It's the same. It's less. Now, I should say it's less. Because if we're just talking about the stimulus checks themselves, under the HEROES Act, it's $1,200 per person plus $1,200 per dependent. So this is even less. Again, we're quibbling over this like $600 when we're pumping trillions of dollars into these businesses and propping them up, the airlines, you name it. So the Senate Democrats, the Senate can't do anything without Democratic support in this. Right now, I think that Mitch McConnell needs to understand that the path to safely reopening the economic recovery is to take is to suppress the spread of this virus. And even with social distancing, even with requiring people to wear masks, they need extra, the CDC needs to have extra funding, which is not part of this. They need to have extra, testing and tracing. State and local governments need extra money. They're not getting. They had a 90-minute meeting yesterday in Nancy Pelosi's office after this bill was announced, and Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi said they left the meeting incredibly frustrated. They thought that it didn't go far enough. And they're basically dithering right now. Republicans are dithering by allowing this to get to this point, allowing unemployment benefits to have run out, eviction moratoriums to have essentially ended, and you want to slash unemployment benefits at the same time. Remember, we only have about 45 days left until early voting starts. That means Republicans have a short window right now, or it's going to be a bloodbath to turn this thing around. I liked what Sagar said over on The Rising. He's a Republican, he's a conservative. He has been incredibly upset and critical of the handling of this response on the stimulus front. And he points out early voting, that unless Republicans can somehow get absentee ballot voting at a level that Democrats are likely to have, it's game over, they're out. Because early voting really is going to start in the next few weeks. They only have about 45 days to change the national attention right now on this whole mess, or it's game over. Because this election is probably going to be decided in the next few weeks. We're not going to have to wait 98 days until November 3rd. Listen to what Sauger had to say about this. I like what he thought. I like where his head is at on this. Remember, he's a Republican.
Each of the states I just listed are critical for Trump or Republicans to win in 2020, or at the very least, have a decent showing. If they do not, then they're toast. It's over, which is a big problem because realistically, that means they only have about 45 days to turn things around, which is an issue because it took nearly 4 months or 120 days of dithering by the White House on coronavirus, of Republican lawmakers signaling that they're more concerned with declining economic output than with American lives, for the dismal polling to get where it is right now. Now, coronavirus is the #1 issue for American voters in 2020 with recent polling. It's the top issue to nearly 1/3 of all voters. So the remainder of voters are concerned about the economy. Now, take this polling. Look at.
So there you go. Where do you come down on this? Would you say that coronavirus is one of the top issues for you right now? It is for Grover. It is for me as well, the health and wellness of my family. You know, coronavirus could be a catch-all, though, because it really encompasses, you know, reopening schools and what happens with the health and wellness of our family. I think it's a catch-all right now because the economy is so tied to that. So that poll may look like it's separate, 15% for economy and jobs and unemployment, according to that Fox News poll, 29% saying coronavirus. But I think his head is absolutely right on this. You have 45 days to turn this sentiment around. How are you going to do that? President Trump's approval rating right now at 38% approval rating. But it's, you know, I think it's self-inflicted. I think it really is self-inflicted. Because when a few weeks ago you come out and say it's going to be bigger and better, this next stimulus is going to be bigger than better than anything that the Democrats wanted. And it's not, it's 1/3. And then when we dive a little bit deeper into this and we find out that one of the sticking points in this bill is $2 billion set aside for the new FBI building. The FBI building has $2 billion set aside so that they can build a new FBI headquarters right near a Trump hotel. This was a big sticking point. When Mitch McConnell was asked about this yesterday, he just sort of shrugged. Why is this in there? And he just said it was a priority for the president. You know, I guess if the president didn't get his payroll tax cut, at least he got his FBI building. And I thought he hated the FBI. So why is this such a big push? I still don't understand it. I mean, other than the fact that maybe it's catty-cornered to the Trump hotel, I don't know. That's in it. That's a priority. Also in the bill, liability protections for businesses and schools so they can avoid being sued by anyone who contracts COVID-19 during the reopening. And the agency also in the FBI would be able to buy new personal protective equipment. So there's a lot of PPE provisions in this as well. So, you know, look, I should mention that this is the first step in this process. This is not the end of the line. Democrats now will have to go back and forth on this. So it really comes down to Democrats right now. Where will they be on this bill? I mean, will Democrats push back on this unemployment benefit? Because the biggest issue here is this adds a whole layer of complexity to these state and local governments. You know, the problem right now is that these state and local governments cannot handle the percentage figuring out of what you made at your job and then having to figure out what is 70% of that. That was why the federal government stepped in the first place and added that $600. That's why the Fed jumped in on this in the beginning. Because we know they can't handle it. We know they're overwhelmed. And now what you're doing is you're basically saying, you're throwing that out the window and you're saying, that's okay. We're just going to let you handle it with your antiquated computer systems at the state level. That's fine. Just go handle it. So many of you haven't even received your unemployment benefits as it is. And now there's going to be a huge gap because those ended last week. We don't have anything signed. We're now going to wait for the Democrats to come back and say, no, we're not dropping this to $200 per week. We're going to demand a higher amount. There's also going to be a greater push for state and local governments. There's going to have to be some additional pushing on contact testing and tracing across the country. You know, state and local governments are just hemorrhaging right now. The fact that this isn't a greater concern is ludicrous. And you see Dr. Fauci, who's saying, we're in this for the long haul, that we are now facing a major uphill battle as we head into the fall, trying to get schools reopened. Dr. Fauci came out and basically rebuked President Trump over this idea that we're battling for the cure right now. Donald Trump, shared that video on Twitter of a doctor wrongly saying that hydroxychloroquine can cure coronavirus. They blasted Dr. Fauci for misleading people about this drug. Twitter, Facebook removed those posts because they think it's damaging on Monday night. We're a long way from getting out of this. We also had word that the NSA, the head of the NSA, Robert Owens, went home. Robert O'Brien is working from home because of contracting the coronavirus. This is the highest ranking official in President Trump's cabinet. He's working from home, and that they said they didn't want to risk exposure to Vice President Pence or President Trump. And there was a lot of members of the staff that didn't even know about it who had traveled with him recently on an airplane and otherwise. He says he has mild symptoms. He's been self-isolating at home, working from a secure location off-site. So what do you think about the latest stimulus news? Do you think that this goes far enough? Eric Prater says here in the chat, he says, look, I still owe $4,800. I'm owed about $4,800 in back pay from the Kentucky Unemployment Office. Let me know in the chat right now, how many of you are still waiting on your unemployment benefits? How many of you are worried about this gap in payments? Now we know this gap could drag on for a few weeks. If we listen to what Kevin McCarthy says, we maybe have this thing by the beginning of August.
Sitting out there that hasn't gone into the economy. More than $100 billion for states. Could we make that more flexible? They could get down to every city and county as well. I believe we can get there. So you're going to hear some people making different points back and forth. That's part of making legislation. The deadline, I think, will probably get passed July 31st, but I bet we probably get this done the first week of August.
Don't miss. So the first week in August. First week in August. Unbelievable. As I just kind of monitor and keep an eye on what's happening this morning on this and where Republicans are or where our Democrats are at the moment. The reporting from the Washington Post this morning has Democrats saying we're not going to budge on this. We're not going to budge on this unemployment benefit piece. So if you just joined us late, the very latest, of course, is the new stimulus bill is in proposal phase right now from Republicans. They met with Democrats yesterday for 90 minutes to go over it. Democrats were not happy. They were pretty frustrated by it. Among the big sticking points is the unemployment benefits. They are going to be slashed from $600 down to $200. The GOP plan would lower the average unemployment benefits from $921 per week to $521 per week. That would be a 50% reduction, according to an analysis released Tuesday by the left-leaning Century Foundation. Republicans have stressed that they are sending another round of the stimulus payments out, although for many people that will only make up for some of the differences, of course. It's also likely that the final UI number is higher after these negotiations. So if maybe Democrats can work something out here where the stimulus payment is higher or the unemployment benefits go higher to make up for this difference. There are many areas where the parties are far apart on this. Dems have called for more than $200 billion in rental and housing assistance. There's nothing here. The GOP bill pushes for just $3 billion for housing. We don't have exact numbers yet on it, though, so we won't see this until we're able to get this in a written form. But there may be only $3 billion on this for housing aid. Remember, Democrats wanted upwards of $200 billion for rental and landlord assistance. So they're throwing $3 billion, but we're spending $2 billion on an FBI building? This hasn't got a lot of attention, but it's important. This is another piece of it. It's called the Employee Retention Credit. It'll be a tax credit for businesses that took a big decline in revenues but are bringing workers back. So that will be a part of this bill, of course, is the Employee Retention Credit. The payroll tax cut, of course, was left out of this. President Trump, he wanted this. They didn't want it. The Employee Retention Credit will likely add more than $1 billion in business tax relief to the cost of the bill. So again, if you've got payroll taxes as a part of the bill, and then you're also including the employee retention credit, the government is losing money big time. I mean, I don't know how they're going to pay for this overall. You know, if you listen to the Fed chief, Jerome Powell, talk about this, he said it's okay. We don't need to be worried about the debt right now because money is so cheap. Our borrowing capacity is fantastic. Interest rates are at zero. We should be borrowing money right now to get money in the hands of the consumer to keep the economy afloat. Will $1,200 cut it for you? Let me know in the comments. Also in the GOP bill is, see, again, one of the big criticisms in all of this is that it's piecemeal, that it's a bunch of different provisions. There's no one cohesive bill. That's what one of the big frustrating pieces was for Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi yesterday. Give us one bill, not all of this piecemeal approach. The bill includes $100 billion for 20-year loans at a 1% interest rate for seasonal businesses and those in low-income areas with a 50% decline in revenues. That's much more generous than the federal business aid relief that the Treasury has sitting out there right now that people aren't just taking advantage of. So there's all this money sitting out there right now on these Main Street programs by the Federal Reserve, but they're just not, people aren't accessing them. So that money is sitting there. They're just not doing anything about it. So I guess the Republicans thought that this was important to include in this bill, but I guess the proof's already in the pudding. I mean, I don't know, these businesses aren't touching it for some reason. Are they just not educated about it? They don't know about it? I mean, they've done a pretty terrible job of getting this information out to people, and people getting access to this information has also been difficult. People getting access to these loans has been laborious at best. So this is an important detail on this GOP plan I want to mention here, that proposing a 70% wage replacement of prior income, but it's not just 70% of any prior income, there's a cap. So the federal subsidy will only kick in a maximum of $500, maximum. That means in some states, workers earning as little as $50,000 a year would hit that cap. But it's so complicated. I just think you're adding this whole layer of complexity now onto these state and local unemployment offices that are just going to have to figure this all out on their own. Yeah. Unbelievable. So that's the very latest on this. I wish I had better news. I do think it is too little too late. It's already too late, and it's too little.